Everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Hemmings Hot Rod Barbecue. On today's show, we have our very special friend, Ryan Douthit of Driving Sports TV. Ryan, how you doing?
I am doing fantastic. The snow is just starting to fall in the Cascade Mountains, and I am stoked to get out there. But,
okay, so
I'm in the office today.
so this is good because you having snow brings us to the topic of today's subject, right? On today's topic, on today's show, what we're going to talk about is all-wheel drive versus front-wheel drive versus four-wheel drive versus all season versus snow tires versus bald tires versus track tire, blah, 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 the whole gamut. And basically what we're going to try to do is give you a little education and prepare you for the inclement weather that's coming, unless you live where I live in California, where we never see snow. Sorry, everybody, just the way it is. We have a lot of other bullshit
the state
here.
Might be on fire, but
that's
you don't
true.
see snow at least.
But we don't see snow, so we're gonna go with that. So okay, so let's talk about the three major food groups in automobiles traction. Right, we've got front wheel drive, all wheel drive, four wheel drive. Okay.
Yes.
And we also have subcategories of that. So you have part-time four-wheel drive, part-time all-wheel drive, part-time front-wheel drive that converts to all-wheel drive, right?
I think that would be classified as all-wheel drive.
Would that be classified as all-wheel drive?
Yeah, because those systems always kick into all-wheel drive when they need it. So it's basically all-wheel drive.
Okay. So let's talk about what people think they need as opposed to what people actually need. Now, living here on the West, actually, I'm going to say this, living everywhere, you will see this. We talk about our friends with the big jacked up, pickup trucks and the tread
First thing
blocks.
Came to mind was a Bronco Sasquatch package,
right?
With the big all terrains, and then they throw
37
a 3-inch
lift
on it. Oh, 37s, and it's like, dude, you're going to Safeway. You don't need that.
Well, that's the whole thing. All right, so do we want to talk about off-road or do we want to talk about winter weather first? How do we want to hit this?
I think winter is more timely since the weather's starting to hit bad, and I think that I think more people are going to be interested in that right now. So let's focus on that with maybe a few little tangential diversions along the way.
That works for me. Okay, now for those that don't know, Ryan has Driving Sports TV on YouTube. Ryan is one of the few out there that literally made his own driving obstacle training course to really test out these trucks. So when I tell you out there that the man is an authority on every drive system out there when it comes to SUVs, CUVs, pickup trucks, just shut up and listen to what I'm telling you, because the man knows his shit. Okay.
So the one thing I think the biggest credential here is the fact that when we did the Toyota Sienna all-wheel drive hybrid, because it was all-wheel drive, we went ahead and took it on a mountain trail and tested out the all-wheel drive system in those conditions. So
that's solid.
Yeah,
that's solid. That's solid. So Ryan, okay, so let's put it this way: winter's coming. Okay.
Yes.
Depending on where you live, if you live in an area. Well, let's talk about the difference between all-wheel drive versus four-wheel drive first.
Great start. Yeah. So I'm not going to get into all of the subcategories because that just becomes a quagmire of marketing speak and whatnot. But the general idea is that all-wheel drive. Family Guy throw out there. Anyway, the biggest difference is that all-wheel drive is what you will find in most unibody constructed vehicles. So like if you get a Subaru, that's going to be all-wheel drive. If you get a Ford Escape or even a new Maverick, those are all unibody designs. They will have all-wheel drive. And the idea of all-wheel drive is that basically it's typically a front bias system. Typically, that means that most of the power goes to the front wheels, and that it'll typically use a clutch plate between the front wheels and back wheels to transmit the power to the back as necessary. Now, these are typically what are referred to as open differential systems, in that if one wheel is spinning because there's no traction, all the power will bleed out of that wheel, and you'll have no spinning with that wheel that theoretically has grip. Now, manufacturers in the past, I'd say 10 years, have basically solved that issue by using what's called brake vectoring, where that wheel starts spinning, the computer knows it, it adds brakes to it, since the wheel can't leach out of that tire, that wheel, it then can only go to the wheels with grip, and that can go side to side or front to back. So it's basically it's a fairly low cost system to implement in terms of hardware. And so that's also why you've seen it on so many different vehicles. Some vehicles do it better than others. And some are full-time all-wheel drive and some are part-time all-wheel drive. Many vehicles will basically be front wheel drive for the first 5 miles per hour or so, basically starting. And then they'll disconnect the rear wheels and it's front wheel drives only because they want economy. Still an all-wheel drive vehicle, but with limitations. And it sometimes will wait for a slip to respond to send that power to the back. And that little slip, it's so quick to respond these days. The old systems relied on hydraulics. So it needed to spin, and then the hydraulics built up and then it put the power back. Now it's just a computer going on, off, on, off. So it's a lot quicker to respond. So any ideas that you might have had about those type of systems from 15, 20 years ago, they don't really apply to today's. Today's systems are very, very good. However, they do rely on spinning tires to transmit that power, because if you don't, basically they slip before they grip. The transverse, the opposite side of that would be what we call four-wheel drive in the US. And I do want to say this is a very specific to the US naming convention. Globally, they use all-wheel drive and four-wheel drive pretty interchangeably, but in the US, it definitely means one thing.
It's a different thing.
Very different thing. And four-wheel drive would be what you'd find on like an F-150 pickup. It would be on the big Ford Bronco, not the little Bronco.
Most likely,
the little Bronco.
Most trucks body on frame will have four-wheel drive, as opposed to now. Let's clarify that. This is 101, folks. Body on frame, completely separate frame of a vehicle, separate chassis, and you have the body, which is the structure that you sit in, gets lowered on top, bolted down, body on frame. There you go. Unibody, one big piece, basically like a mold. Think of it like an ice pop that you pour into your ice cube tray, get out, boom. It is, there's no one big, huge piece, right? More, it's, I don't want to say it's easier to make, but it's cheaper to make, definitely. But because of that, the systems generally go a little differently. Unibody is sometimes referred to as not as strong as a body on frame, which is why when you talk about vehicles that can really tow, most people will say, I'd rather have a body on frame. It's just much stronger system and so on and so forth.
Right. And I think a lot of that, not only does a lot of it come from just historically being true, but it also is the way that the vehicle manufacturers segment the different vehicles. Like if they build, the Bronco is a great example, because you have the big Bronco, which is body on frame, and the small Bronco Sport, which is a crossover unibody. Totally different systems, same, very similar name. Bronco Sport uses all-wheel drive. Excellent all-wheel drive, by the way.
Yes, very good.
You can buy. So good. But the big Bronco Sport uses the part-time or full-time, depending on which trim you get, but it uses four-wheel drive. Now, the thing I want to say about four-wheel drive is that depending on the model, you might have full-time and you might have part-time. Now, part-time, just not to get too much into the weeds here, part-time is typically rear-wheel drive until you turn the knob or hit the lever, and then it'll be four-wheel drive. But the important thing to note about that is a true four-wheel drive. That means you're getting, this is again theoretical, I know there's some nuance here. You're getting 50% of your torque to the front two wheels, and you're getting 50% of your torque to the rear wheels, which means you can't turn smoothly because there's variations in left-right torque distribution, which is why crossovers are so nice to drive.
That's correct.
If you have a full-time four-wheel drive, it compensates for that, but part-time four-wheel drive does not. So if you want to hit that mountain pass and you want to drive on the snow and you're switching from a part-time system into four-wheel drive, you're going to end up with a little bit of crab creep because your power is so locked 50-50. Well, when you're turning, it's going to do this.
That's right.
But let's just say you're on snow. It's also not very good for snow at high speeds because it's not compensating for that variations in traction. So really, in that case, you want full-time four-wheel drive, which is kind of the perfect system, but it's heavy, it's expensive, it's on very limited vehicles. You can get it on top trim F-150s. A lot of the Chevys have it as an option. And then when you start getting to those, you have a lot of variations. And then outside of all of these, you have weirdos like the Jeep Cherokee, not the Grand Cherokee, just the straight Cherokee, which uses a Planet differential to switch. And the Subaru STI, again, planetary differentials, they get so weird. So keeping the conversation, I think that for the sake of the conversation here, we should probably refer to four-wheel drive as the part-time system, because that's what's on most vehicles.
That's correct.
I have a Ford Tremor Ranger that has part-time four-wheel drive, the Toyota Tacoma, part-time. Toyota 4Runner,
Bronco,
a lot of the most
part-time.
Bronco, and anything old you get is going to be part-time. So we're just kind of going to keep it at that. Now, one reason that a lot of people want to get, at least in the Northwest, and I think in the Northeast as well too, if your vehicle has a badge that says four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, you can go over the mountain passes in the snow without having to put chains on.
Correct. And that's a great point. In Northern California, where I live, if you want to go to Tahoe and it's wintertime, don't think you're going unless you have four-wheel drive. If you have front-wheel drive or rear-wheel drive and you don't have change, you are not going up that hill. So yes, you're correct.
And it's not even a matter of technical aspects. It's legally you're required to have change,
that's right.
At least in the Northwest. So and I'm just prefacing with Northwest because that's the law I know specifically, but I know it's the truth many other places. So very often, like if I know somebody who just goes skiing like twice a year and they're like, I want to buy an all-wheel drive because I don't want to mess with chains, I'm like, it doesn't matter what you buy, honestly, because the main lines are going to be cleared most of the time. 90% of the time they're going to be cleared, and if they're not cleared, if you have no experience driving in that kind of weather, you probably shouldn't be out in it anyway. And also, most likely you're going to be driving on all-season radials, which are not good in the snow anyway.
And that's a whole nother ballgame. All-season radials good at nothing.
Yes, exactly. I would say that I have driven our compounds in a snowstorm before, not by choice. It was a freak snowstorm a month early coming back from SEMA show. Slowest pirouette you've ever seen on the planet in the car I was driving as I was just doing donuts down the freeway at 5 miles per hour. Not something you ever want to do. So anyway.
So let me ask you, so for those of us, or like, I grew up in the Northeast, right? Four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive was really a must, as you are in the Pacific Northwest, right?
That's why it's super country in both those areas, because they were the earliest to adopt an easy to use all-wheel drive system.
Exactly. Would you say that for 90% of the consumers out there, and I'm talking about those people that commute, that have families that are going to the store on a daily basis, not going off-road, okay? Meaning we're not going off-road in mudding, we're not going to the beach, we're not doing forest roads. We are talking about inclement weather such as rain, snow, sleet, stuff like that. All-wheel drive, I would say, would be the one you would want as opposed to a full-time four-wheel drive system. Would I be correct in saying that?
Yeah, I think that is very accurate. And I have a quick story for people who are wondering about, should I even bother getting all-wheel drive? When my wife and I were first married, we bought a Subaru Legacy to replace this awful K car that we had inherited. We had a K car Aries. And by
terrible.
bad, it just stopped working randomly and then would start working again. We brought it to anyway. K cars are awful. Point being is we bought the Subaru we could afford at the time when we were just married. It was, I think my wife and I were actually just discussing this a couple of days ago. We couldn't remember what year it was, but it was a first generation legacy wagon, very used. But so she went from this front wheel drive Aries K as her daily to this Subaru wagon, and she loved it. Several years go on. We drove that one till I think 2004, and she wanted. We started to have some engine issues with that car.
Sure,
it had a very long life before us, and it did many miles with us, so it was time to go. And my wife was very frugal, and she's like, I'm not spending more than like $16,000-$17,000 on a commuter car for me, because I also had a car too. So like, we each had cars. There was no need for us to spend a ton of money. She drove like 5 miles to work. So we bought at the time the very first generation Mazda 3 It was a sedan. I think we paid $16,500 for it. The only option on it were alloy wheels because I was not going to have hubcaps in my family.
That's right.
First rain hits Pacific Northwest. First rain is always a little slipperier just because the roads have
Oil
accumulated
comes
a bunch
up.
of garbage
Sure.
over the summer. Yes, exactly. So this is just for people who like live in LA who have never experienced rain in their lives. The very first rain, she's starting from a stop and the front wheels are just spinning because we lived on a slight hill, and she had forgotten what it was like to drive a front wheel drive car, how little control you have just doing something simple like just going to the store. You're like right, and then you're turning and you're trying to get grip, and the wheels are having trouble getting grip because all your weight's in the back. And and it's at that point we're like, oh crap, well, we own this car now, so we'll keep that in mind for next time we replace her car. Right. We replaced her car in 2021. So we still have that Mazda 3. My daughter will end up driving it probably. But we ended up replacing it with a Subaru Crosstrek because my wife's like, yeah, I'm going to all-wheel drive.
All-wheel drive. Point. Sure.
And for her, the Crosstrek is a perfect blend because it's all my wife really drives is to pick up the kids from school, drop them off at school, groceries, chores, tasks, whatever. But she has no need for something bigger. And I always own something bigger. So if we're doing a family vacation, me.
But that all-wheel drive system though, great in the rain. And I'm going to say this is most for the majority of all-wheel drive systems. Great in the rain, light snow, totally fine, totally adequate.
Yep.
Not made for off-roading per se. As
people
much
do it,
you,
but you
can do it.
Element to a degree.
It's a little out of its element. And I will say that all-wheel drive systems are getting more complex, right? They have electronically locking differentials now and transfer, things like that. However, I would never go so far as to say they're remotely as good as a full-time four-wheel drive system. With locking differentials front and rear. But that's a whole nother ballgame. I think that's
things that the Chevy Colorado Bison with a diesel engine and front and rear lockers is like my dream, but that thing's like $63,000.
Right.
Like, what?
Well, I mean, the stuff gets so expensive. It gets so expensive right now. But I mean, when you think about what the majority of the people need, what consumers need, right? And I always tell people, they ask me, and I say, well, where do you live? I live in Los Angeles. Buy something that's not all-wheel drive. You're never going to need it. You're never going to see rain. It doesn't matter, right?
Exactly.
It's like people who buy four-wheel drive pickup trucks that live in New Mexico or live in LA. Why? Where are you going?
Well,
you're not going off-road.
I do understand actually I do understand people in the Southwest who buy four-wheel drives because there is a lot of miles of mountain roads available down there. And in fact, vehicles like the Bronco are much better suited for the Southwest than they are in the Northwest, even though people buy them. Because if you're going to do any trails in the Northwest, they're small. Our trees grow in super tight.
Yeah.
And so if you're doing a trail up here, if you're driving a full-size Bronco, you're going to scratch the hell out of your bodywork. It's just too big of a vehicle for our roads up here. But if you're in the open desert, oh, so much fun.
Okay. So
I would actually say that's the argument for that type of vehicle in the Southwest is you have just thousands of miles of kind of like off-grid desert areas like Death Valley and stuff like that. I did Death Valley in my 4Runner. It was super fun, and it also gives you the confidence.
So let me ask you this. So give me the perfect scenario for an all-wheel drive owner.
Perfect scenario is like the ideal scenario is somebody who snowboards a few weekends a year, but then also basically just needs a daily driver, but also needs to get reasonable fuel economy. What I see very often is people will go out and they'll buy like a Toyota Tacoma or something like that, and it's like that's a V6. Like you don't need that, a 4-cylinder with a turbo, a small 4-cylinder with a turbo, or even naturally aspirated with all-wheel drive is more than sufficient for most people. In fact, it's interesting, even the new Highlander, which we just did a review on, the next year's model, the 2023, has dropped the V6, and they've now gone to a turbo 4 as well, which is kind of the way the market is moving. And again, that's also the Highlander. Actually, that's an interesting vehicle because it is all-wheel drive, and it'll tow up to 5,000 pounds with the turbo, which is a lot for a unibody. So like a lot of people are like, well, I need a big truck to tow big things. It's like, well, do you really? You know, how
Right.
often
Well,
do you tow?
well, that's just it. I think most people don't understand weight, for some reason,
Mhm.
right? And they don't understand towing capacity and tongue weight. But that's a whole nother that's a
Yeah,
whole nother
that's
conversation.
getting
That's a
into a
whole nother
different,
conversation.
yeah, exactly.
But as far as front wheel drive, right?
Mhm.
So front wheel drive is interesting to me. Front wheel drive, again, there are so many million cars out there that are front wheel drive.
Yep.
Um, is front wheel drive better in inclement weather in European? European? Your opinion.
In my
You're
opinion,
not European.
I'm not your, well, my family was, but I am not. Um, the I have driven numerous front wheel drive vehicles in very, very bad weather, snow, you name it, and rear wheel drive as well too. Probably the best time I ever had was a 92 Miata with snow chains when we had a massive dump of snow in the Northwest and all the freeways were basically vacated. I drifted all of I-5 in the Northwest. It was amazing day. But I've driven that car also in the rain, and I've done pirouettes because it does not have anti-lock brakes. It does not have traction control. It has nothing. And so you really do this. But the one thing I would say is that traction control systems have gotten so good now that it doesn't really matter safety-wise whether you have a rear-wheel drive or front-wheel drive. And I wouldn't have been able to say that a decade ago. Because if you're going in too hot into a corner, you're laying in a little throttle, even a little bit of rain, you're going to start spinning. But with the modern traction control systems, they catch it before it's an issue. So that's not so for daily driving, it's not a big deal. We did do a test with a Ford Maverick front-wheel drive EcoBoost. And honestly, I love the Maverick, but I don't know why anybody would buy the front-wheel drive Maverick with an EcoBoost. That does not make any sense to me.
Yeah.
Because every time we laid on the throttle, it was front wheel spin city.
Right.
It wouldn't. It's like just constant, like put a little stuff in the trunk, and you're like this, and it's just spinning wheels everywhere. So again, to me, I think that even the economy, because actually a lot of people buy front wheel drive vehicles for two reasons. The vehicles are typically less expensive out the door, or they're less expensive to operate because better MPGs, because you don't have parasitic drivetrain loss. The new all-wheel drive systems, almost all of the new ones coming out now, will absolutely disconnect the center drivetrain when you're at speeds over, say, 20 miles an hour or something. So when you're on the freeway, you are literally getting like the same experience as a front wheel drive vehicle, unless you start to, need more traction. So, it's funny. It's just these things used to be so much different than each other, but because all-wheel drive all-wheel drive is so much better. Full part-time four-wheel drive is basically the same as it's always been. You have like these things getting better and better. And then even with front-wheel drive vehicles, because stability control and traction control have gotten so much better. And in fact, any pro driver you ever ask, you'll say, do you want to be in an all-wheel drive vehicle in all seasons in the snow, or do you want to be in a front-wheel drive vehicle? You already know where this is going. Or do you want to be in a front-wheel drive vehicle with, Blizzak snow tires on it? Snow tires every day, because that ultimately makes a bigger difference.
So go ahead.
But you need to have those Blizzaks on. That is the key thing, which a lot of people don't do that.
So we're going to jump on that right now, because Ryan brings up an amazing point. So when we talk about Blizzak is obviously a brand. It's a snow tire.
Yeah.
Now
it's a very popular, expensive, very well regarded tire.
Right. An all-season tire is not is not in any way, shape, or form a snow tire. They are not meant for snow. A snow tire is a snow tire, which is why it has the word snow in front of it. The difference is the rubber compound, quite a bit softer. The way the tire is designed with the sipes and the tread wear and the tread patterns is really specifically designed for snow. And if anybody has ever driven an all season versus snow tire, I will tell you from experience, there is no comparison. So if you live in a place that gets constant snow, if you're in a Wyoming, if you are, Pacific Northwest, if you're in a Vermont or something like that, are they expensive? Yeah. Snow tires aren't cheap. Are they 3 season? No, they are a one season tire. They are
Yeah,
meant for
you need to own
winter.
2 sets of tires.
Two
Now,
sets of
now
tires.
I do want to digress a little bit there though, because there's another type of tire, the all-weather tire, which
Mhm.
is a 4-season tire.
Correct.
They're expensive also, but they're a nice choice for um, some place where you're not covered in snow for 3 months of the year. If you only have like
Mhm.
snow for maybe 1 month of the year or a few weeks of the year,
Correct.
it's a good choice. But they're
Mhm.
not as good in like summer. You know, they're not a good summer tire very much. They
No, they're
wear
not.
very quickly.
Yeah, and I can give a perfect example of that because I ran them. Continental makes a tire called the DWS, which is
Okay.
dry wet snow, right?
Hmm.
And it's called an extreme content DWS. And I used to run them on my Magnum. I used to have an SRT8 Magnum back in the day, and
That's
I
so
lived,
fitting.
yeah, perfect, right? And I was living in Queens at the time, and so just like you said, we would get snow every once in a while, not crazy
Hmm.
snow, but enough snow to make a difference. And with all seasons, the car wouldn't move. And this was a big 400 plus horsepower rear wheel drive, rear wheel drive car. Um,
Yeah.
all seasons, constantly stuck, constantly struggling for traction. The DWSs in light snow to moderate snow, a much
Hmm.
different style tire. You would have traction in the rear, but more importantly, you would have quality braking in the front. Okay.
Right.
And
Right.
traction in the front. Now, were they as good as a Blizzak? No, they were not, but they are a good compromise because you can use them year round if you want. But as Ryan said, be prepared to give up one, you're going to give up mileage because they do burn a lot quicker. Two, you're going to give up handling because the compounds are much softer. But
Bushier. Yep.
if you can, if you say I have to afford one set of tires, an option like Ryan said, like these all weather
Hmm.
is a good option to just a snow or just an all season.
There's another option there too for people who are interested in, you know, owning one set of tires. In the Northwest here, because we don't really get lowland snow, like we'll get 1 to 2 days of lowland
Mm-hmm.
snow in a month. I mean,
Sure.
in a year. But the mountains require snow, and of course, if you want to do trails, you have to do that too. And that's to go with something like a all-terrain tire that is snow rated. They're not all
Mm-hmm.
snow rated, but some are. So
Right.
you end up with like the Falcon Wild Peak is a snow
Mm-hmm.
rated. The Vredestein Pinza is a nice snow
Yep.
rated. And those basically are squishy enough and they have blocks enough that would work really good in snow. Ice, not as good. And specifically the KO2, excuse me a second.
Here's the type.
Specifically thank you. The KO2, which is kind of that legendary off-road
Dude,
monster truck tire.
I have them on my Bronco.
Hockey pucks in the ice. They are
Awful.
not what you want to. Yeah,
Awful.
absolutely
Awful.
dangerous in the ice.
Awful.
So,
Well, and
so you
that's
can't just look at these big blocks and go, "Oh, these big chunky blocks
exactly.
are what's good." It's the compounds.
That's exactly correct. And Ryan, he did bring up a killer point. Like the BF Goodrich KO2, I've run them
Mhm.
for years. I have them on my Bronco down in the Bay Area. I do not get snow down here, so it doesn't matter. Are they great off-road? Fantastic. Bomb-proof sidewalls, great off-road tire,
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah, they kill.
Snow,
Hmm.
not so much. Ice,
Hmm.
not so much. Right. So
I've done
just because,
I've done Yeah, I've done hundreds of miles, maybe thousands of miles in the snow with the Falcon Wild Peak. And the only time where I'm not terribly confident with
yeah,
them is on hard packed ice on a freeway.
right.
Because you're traveling at a higher rate of speed. They're really not good at ice gripping. They're
Hmm.
okay, but you still feel a little bit of that drift just so you're not
Yep.
100% confident. So, you know, obviously, if you're doing freeway, very specifically freeway ice driving, say you live in like, you know, Nebraska or something like
Yeah.
that, where everything's far away from everything and you're always on a freeway and it's always covered in ice, then a Blizzak is a must get.
Must.
But if
Correct.
you're like doing around town, just jumping up to the mountains, you know,
Hmm.
you're staying within a 1 hour range. You know, if you have a vehicle that's appropriate and an all-terrain tire with a snow rating, and the way to know if it's properly snow rated is not to look for the M+S icon. That means mud and snow. That's useless.
Right.
That means
That's yeah.
nothing. That
Right.
means nothing. You want to look for it's a designation that has 3 little mountain peaks on it and some snowflakes.
Hmm.
It's a peak designation, and that is what is actually an industry standard for something that is certified basically to be functional in those conditions.
And you can't really screw that up, right? They kind of,
Yeah.
there was an artist somewhere that was just like, how can I dumb this down to make people understand? And people will still, make no mistake, people will still see a mountain peak with snowflakes on the side of their tire and mistake that for an island somewhere in Hawaii. Because people, right? We know that.
People are people,
but people are people. But I think that it's I think you also have to, when you buy a set of tires, regardless if they're snows or performance or off-road, people seem to understand, and this boggles my mind or fail to understand, that tires are the one single most important part of your vehicle. They are your contact patch to the road of which you are driving on, right?
And not a very big contact patch. We're talking 4 of these,
That's right. So when I see
your
cars,
$50,000 vehicle from being a wadded up pile of trash.
But it doesn't astonish you, and I feel like this when I see people with like, they'll walk in and be like, just give me the cheapest set of tires.
What's the cheap one? Yeah, $50. That's fine.
It's like,
it has an M&S on it. It'll be fine.
Right? Do you understand how crappy tires can be? And I don't think people do. I think people figure, well, they're black and they're round, so they'll be fine. No, that's not the case. There's a reason some tires cost more than others.
I mean, you and I both, because we've reviewed so many, I know you've driven hundreds and hundreds of manufacturer vehicles. Really, if you want to start talking about like nickel and diming and getting down to like the bare necessities of a tire, OEM tires, pretty much every vehicle comes with some minor exceptions. Like my Ranger Tremor came with these general grabbers that are really good. But for the most part, you get pretty trashy tires. And in some cases, like the Toyota Tundra TRD Pro, I think it is, comes with a tire that says Falcon Wild Peak on the side. It looks like a Falcon Wild Peak. It is not snow designated. It does not have a 3-peak designation. And the blocks, the tread blocks, are milder than the one you actually buy. I mean, so I blame the tire manufacturers essentially for making it so confusing that you can't even just buy a Wild Peak and get a Wild Peak. You have to be like, oh, what's the exact chemical formulation of that Wild Peak versus that Wild Peak? So they're not helping themselves by making these manufacturer dumbed down versions of these tires that are, to meet a criteria of being 10 cents less per tire so that the manufacturer, can save a buck, It's like,
well, okay. So let me ask you, I'm going to give you a couple of different scenarios, right? Okay. So, you live in San Francisco, you go to Lake Tahoe to go snowboarding 4 times a year. Sometimes you encounter some deep snow. Sometimes you don't. Most of the time the roads are just wet. All-wheel drive, 4-wheel drive, what type of tire?
I would buy a basic Ford Bronco Sport, and I would use I think I might actually put Wild Peak Trails on it, which is a milder version of the Wild Peak. I actually run it on my wife's car. That is snow. It is, I believe it's peak rated. I think it is. 90% sure it's peak rated. But that should be good enough to be able to get you up to the snow. Plus it looks good and it's all-wheel drive, so it's also economical. And it's good looking, important for San Francisco. It's small, so it handles well in traffic. The all-wheel drive system is good even on the basic all-wheel drive one, without going to the Badlands, which has the special rear lockers. And you can throw a set of Wild Peaks on it, and it looks the business.
Looks the part.
Yeah, it looks good. So that's what I would get personally.
All right. Scenario. Let me give you a scenario number 2.
Yeah, give me another one. Yeah.
Okay. Scenario number 2. South Carolina, lots of rain. Never go off road. Never see snow. All-wheel drive, front-wheel drive, 4-wheel drive, and the type of tire.
There's also
or rear-wheel drive. We could go rear, because that's a thing.
There's very few hills in the South Carolina. I mean, people who live in South Carolina will say there's hills and mountains, but being from the Northwest, there's not very big hills there. So I would say that you can go front or rear. They're just fine. I would be fine with that. And I would just get a good all-season radial, but I'd get a high quality one, not one of the trashy ones, because you still want good grip. And the road conditions can vary pretty dramatically between different municipalities in that area. So you want something that can kind of handle different traction surfaces. And they do get snow about once every 5 years, don't they?
Yeah.
Although I think the biggest issue with snow is always the other people. It's never me.
Correct.
It's always the other people.
It's always everybody else.
And that's not, yeah, exactly. And so I'd say that any place that gets snow one day every 5 years, nobody should drive, because nobody's going to know how to deal with that.
Just stay home.
And that's
correct.
Just stay home. Even if you're an expert driver, you're going to get plugged by somebody who isn't. So just stay home. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Scenario number 3. You live in the Southwest. You're New Mexico. You are Arizona, Southern San Diego, Los Angeles, that area. Never see snow. You do occasionally see rain, and quite a lot of it. You can get these deluges down there. You do go off-road, because let's face it, we live in the desert. So there is loads of opportunity to not only go off-road, and by off-road I mean in the desert, but also to hit some really great sand dunes and stuff like that, right?
Yes.
So where are you going? All-wheel drive, front-wheel drive?
I mean, I don't mean to call out 2 Ford products, but the Bronco is tight for that. I mean, that's the big Bronco is so well targeted to that kind of environment. That's what it's built for. And I wouldn't even say Jeep necessarily. And the reason I wouldn't say Jeep is simply because I don't consider them comfortable or necessarily safe on freeways, especially LA freeways.
Now, are you talking about Wranglers especially?
I'm talking about Wranglers specifically.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fine.
But if somebody doesn't want to go something as cartoonish as a Bronco, then a Grand Cherokee would be amazing in LA, because you got a big dominant road machine. It can soak up all of that awful pavement on the 405 down there. Plus, it can hit pretty much any location that you want, tire dependent, obviously.
Correct.
So that would be a really good one down there. I actually drove a Compass. I did some off-roading with a Jeep Compass last year in New Mexico, and that was really fun. And we also actually took it up to Lake Chelan and or was that Tahoe? Well, I don't even know where I was.
So are the smaller Jeep CUVs? Because I'll say a Compass is a CUV, okay, not an SUV.
Absolutely, yes.
That is a front-wheel drive based all-wheel drive system, as opposed to a full-on 4x4. Correct?
Correct. Yes. The funny thing is, like, so you look at the Compass, which is a compact utility vehicle. It is a unibody. It's a front engine with front wheel drive essentially, but with a clutch to power the back wheels. Again, a very good system. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think they use the Borg-Warner system on that one, but it's very closely related to the system that's found in the Ford Maverick. It's not the exact same system, but it's very closely related. And both of those are excellent. I've done tons of stuff with the Compass. I bought one, owned it for a few months, loved it, but just didn't need it for more videos, so I got rid of it and bought a something else. That vehicle actually, with a set of Wild Peaks, is what I put on it. Did a really good. It was a really nice setup. Snow, ice. It got really good economy. Really a nice interior. 2022, they dialed that interior to 11. The leather, the surfaces, too much piano black, but overall, it's a very impressive interior for a reasonable amount of money. I mean, we're still looking at like mid 30s, which is a lot, but whenever you're talking a fully loaded all-wheel drive vehicle, you're usually going to pay in that range anyway. And so it was definitely competitive. But the funny thing is, like, so you take the Compass, and then you also look at the Cherokee, and the Cherokee looks a lot like the Compass. But the Cherokee, totally different all-wheel drive system. That's right. With a planetary reduction gear and a lockable center differential. And so, like, and that's a really good example. So if you have these two vehicles, let's just say you live in LA and you go to Tahoe every once in a while, Compass would be a really good vehicle. If you live in the Northwest and you actually want to, like, go up to a lake in the middle of nowhere and you know you're going to have to rock crawl to get there, the Cherokee is the much better choice. They look very similar, but the capabilities are very different. And the thing is, you can't, I think, not to toot my own horn here, but I think that the best way to look at the capability of these vehicles is do not listen to the dealers, do not listen to the marketing. Kia is a huge sinner when it comes to marketing. They use incorrect terms. They call their system a center locking differential, which it is not. It has no differential in the middle. It's a clutch, totally different thing. And then they show them on tops of mountains.
Yeah, no, ain't happening. Not unless it was helicoptered up there.
Exactly. And that frustrates me because in the wintertime, when we're out filming in the mountains, in the snow, we're constantly like, it's gotten to the point now where if we see somebody who needs a rescue because they're slipped into a ditch or something, and they're fine, obviously no medical issues, just they're inconvenienced, we're going to finish our filming and then we're going to tow them out because they were stupid for going up there in the first place. They didn't have the right tires. They didn't know what they were doing. They got in over their heads. That's fine. No emergency. They can wait 40, 50 minutes for us to finish our bit, and then we'll tow them out. And if somebody else tows them out, good for them.
Fine.
But I see that all the time because people get the wrong expectation based on the marketing that they're presented with.
That's correct.
And Kia is the absolute worst sinner of that for those reasons. But there's one other thing we have to talk about too, specific to snow, and that is ground clearance. And it is way more important than a lot of people think about.
That is a fabulous point.
Because typically when people think of snow, you think of fresh, light snow. You think, oh, snow is puffy. So is
I'll just go right through it.
No problem.
No,
it can be harder than a brick.
That's right.
Especially in the Northeast, Northwest, when you start to get the spring thaw and then refreeze, thaw, refreeze, you end up with a brick this tall that if you hit it with a vehicle that doesn't have a ground clearance, you're going to tear your whole underbody out. You're done.
Correct.
You just caused $10,000 of damage to your vehicle because you weren't aware of what you were going over. We have lots of videos where we get stuck in this stuff. A lot of people call it like Northwest cement or something like that.
Sure.
And but ground clearance is what can get you in and out of those situations. That's actually another thing where Subaru really excels because they've always had like 8.6 or more ground clearance, whereas like Acura on their RDX will usually be a little bit less. And really, when you're talking an inch,
an inch is a lot. Well,
people
don't understand that. They don't understand exactly how much an inch is. They don't understand how much a half an inch is, right? And so when we talk about stuff, when we talk about measurements on certain vehicles, and this will go a little in the weeds, but we're talking like back spacing on wheels to clear brake calipers and stuff. We talk in centimeters, right? Millimeters, about like if it clears, it clears. When you're talking about off-road clearance, inches make the difference, right?
Absolutely.
They really do.
The professional term is approach, departure, and breakover angles, and that has to do with measurements of approaching, departure, whatever. Those actually, so a lot of people talk about ground clearance, but the ground clearance is also what accentuates those other elements. So you can climb over things or also roll in things. Because when you're on a trail or if you're in snow or ice, even on a regular public road, if it's been a few days of snow and ice, you're going to get that ice trough down the middle where it's poking up, crowning a little bit, and your vehicle can start grinding on that. And that stuff is very abusive to your underside. It's like, just like rolling over rocks, basically dragging your undercarriage, and that can tear off bumpers very easily. And that's the least of your worries. That's cosmetic, but you hit your oil sump in the front and your oil bell at the front, and you're done. So that's very bad stuff. So if you are dealing with and that's one thing that Jeep really excels on, like the Grand Cherokee, like what does that get like with the air suspension? I think it's like 11 inches of ground
11
clearance.
inches of ground clearance. Yeah, it's crazy.
It's
you're in the clouds with that thing. And I think that's what I think that's really what the basis of kind of this episode was. I think, we touched on some of the all-wheel drive systems and four-wheel drive systems. We touched on ground clearance and tires. But I think one of the biggest things as the consumer can do is you have to do your due diligence. You have to read independent reviews. You have to watch independent videos. You really have to research because, Ryan and I will both tell you this from experience. Marketing is just that. It's marketing. They want to get you to buy certain things. And a lot of times it's on point, but other times there's some gray area there. And as a consumer,
you also have to be, and you have to be, honest with yourself with what you really need. You're going to be like, am I really going to be going rock crawling every weekend? No. Maybe I don't need that Wrangler,
Yeah. Like I always see it as great. I don't know how many thousands of people driving around up in the Bay Area with Rubicons, right? And they have Jeep Rubicons with 37-inch
Completely
tires on it,
clean with no scratches.
completely clean, not one scratch, and gas cans mounted to the sides of the vehicle and jacks all over the place. And
getting
that
10
son of
miles
a
to the
bitch is
gallon.
10 miles. That son of a
Yeah.
bitch never been off road. Meanwhile,
No, never.
you've got other vehicles out there. You've got Kia Sorentos with knobbies that are trying to go off road, and it's like, figure out what the mission of your vehicle is. Figure out what you are going to use it for. And like Ryan said, be honest with yourself. Do you go skiing once a year, or do you go skiing 24 times a year? Makes a difference.
I love you see these vehicles, like somebody will buy a sedan and then they'll put on a massive cargo carrier on the roof. And you're like, you, sir, bought the wrong vehicle. Why this massive cargo carrier on the sedan? You should have just bought a wagon to begin with. And I understand people's needs change and maybe it's seasonal and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is you see people tooling around with rooftop tents on their trucks all the time. Like, you're not camping this weekend.
Dude, we're gonna have a whole nother that's a whole nother podcast.
Unnecessary off-road equipment.
No, I'm sorry. Well, you know me. I hate nature. So like that, but that's a whole nother ball. I'll cry. I can't even go down that road. But yeah, I think here's the deal, people. Educate yourselves. If you're going to go, if you need to buy an SUV or a CUV, if you live in a place with inclement weather, decide how inclement it is, decide what type of all-wheel drive system you need, decide what your price point is, then really decide on tires. If you live in a place with snow tires are a fantastic investment. You can buy them in pairs on like Diorac and Discount Tire Direct with an extra set of wheels. Is it a hassle? Yes, but it's a hassle that can also mean, the difference between you slamming into somebody in front of you or just driving around them.
Absolutely.
Off-road 4-wheel drive systems, if you truly go off-road, then pair that system with a really good set of off-road tires. You'll be fine. If you live in a place that you're just getting some rain, some light snow and things like that, a nice front-wheel drive, all-wheel drive system is great with a good set of all seasons. You'll be fine. Good.
You will likely not regret going with all-wheel drive if you do have that option, because it will usually those vehicles have a higher resale value when you get ready to sell that vehicle. So if you can afford to go with all-wheel drive, I would always recommend going with it. Although, some people prefer front, some people prefer rear, and that's fine. That's fine too. Just be aware that, you're not going to take that vehicle skiing as often. Not a good idea unless you're going to go winter tires.
Right. Exactly. So there you have it. That is our winter
long-winded, rather windy, as windy as it is driving on snow.
Right. But if you go back and you re-listen to it, there's a pretty good tidbits of information there that you want to follow.
Yeah, I think so.
Or, one of the best in off-road CUV, SUV reviews, go to Driving Sports TV, watch Ryan's reviews, one of the most honest guys in the business.
Appreciate it.
Otherwise, if you want to go buy any car, that's not necessarily true, but a lot of different cars. Hemmings has classifieds with 25,000 cars. Plus, we have a kick-ass auction, so please go to the site and check it out. Otherwise, Ryan, thank you as always for coming on.
Always a pleasure, Mike.
Next time, we'll talk about what are we going to talk about next time? I gotta think of something.
I think we should talk about really bad. We should just do a whole episode on bad takes on off-road modifications. Like maybe we can get a bunch of pictures and like totally rip on them.
Well, here's the deal. So SEMA is next week. I will be at SEMA. I will come back with dozens of pictures of vehicles that are 1,000% useless, and we'll talk about those.
I love it.
A post SEMA wrap. Yes. Good.
Yep, sounds great. Cool.
All right.
Take care.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you soon.
See ya.
Thanks for listening, folks. And again, please subscribe to the Hot Rod Barbecue podcast. If you're on Spotify, check us out there. Subscribe to it on iTunes. And if you are going to go to YouTube, make sure you go to the Hot Rod Barbecue podcast and hit that subscribe button, and we'll come to you every week.